Good people don't smoke marijuana.
I've known Larry for a long time.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. Our love. I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's the medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa. I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's the medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This week we have a great guest, Gil Luxembourg from Israel, and he's totally responsible with a lot of help for the medical cannabis program there in Israel. He's going to tell us all about that, his work with Professor Raphael Mechoulam, and we have a lot to talk about. We'll probably do about 3 shows with him. That's how full of information Gil is. So let's just get right to it. We'll be right back with Gil Luxembourg right after this.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. Our love.
Hi, and today our guest from Israel, live from Israel on this recording, is Gil Luxembourg, and he is a patient using cannabis and also an educator in Israel, and is very responsible for the medical cannabis program and educating not only doctors and nurses, but patients as well. So welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio, Gil. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Larry. It's a great being here.
So tell us about, first of all, how you got interested in cannabis, since we know what you do, and then we'll talk about all your education. So what got your interest in cannabis?
Well, to be honest, I grew up with the generation of just saying no to drugs, so it wasn't an attraction to me when I was growing up. I mean, I was one of those nerds at school that didn't use weed. But when I turned 18 and joined the military forces as a mandatory thing in Israel, you go to the army. I spent my time in the army, and then at some point I just started bleeding and got hospitalized. And internal bleeding. And after 3 months in the hospital and down 37 kilos, that's about, 75 pounds. All the doctors were not certain how to save me because none of the medications helped. I was diagnosed as a Crohn's disease patient. And one of the doctors who took a huge risk upon himself, looking back, I know it now, but back at the time I was so ignorant I didn't have a clue, took me aside and gave me 5 roll joints and told me, try this, it might work. And he basically saved my life. 2 joints into it, I went and ate the whole mess hall. So
That's the first time you ever had imbibed in cannabis? And
that was the first time I've ever consumed cannabis in my life.
You smoked like 2 whole joints?
No, 1.5.
Okay.
And then I got such a munchies attack. I went to the mess hall, knocked on the door saying, I want food now. And they went like, it's only 5:30. We serve at 6. What do you mean? I'm hungry. I haven't eaten in 3 months.
Oh my God.
So they gave me a loaf of bread and like this chocolate spread.
Okay, like a new
until they opened the mess hall.
Oh wow.
And by the time they opened the mess hall, I ate the whole thing.
Did you have chocolate all over your face and everything, or not much?
I'm not sure. I didn't look at the mirror. I went straight to the food. So and then afterwards, when I met my doctor and he said, you ate too much, it's gonna hurt. You should try smoking more. I just smoked a bit more and nothing happened. I didn't vomit. I didn't have any more diarrhea than before. I didn't have any more bleeding. It actually decreased a bit. And so my doctor gave me a bit more, and then they released me for the first time after 3 months home for the weekend, where I met my GP from back home, and I told him, listen, this physician in the army gave me weed. and it helps. He said, well, it's illegal, but if it helps, I'm not opposing.
Uh-huh. Did he or did you actually at that time know of Professor Mechoulam's work?
Well, I was unfamiliar at the time. I got familiarized very short afterwards. But at that time, I just went back to the army on Monday morning and told my doctor that, it helped and I'm grateful and whatnot. And he turned two shades whiter and paler than the wall behind him, picked me up about a foot in the air and screamed at me, I'm trying to save your life. Why are you trying to kill mine?
Oh my.
Just then it hit me that he was about to face 20 years in prison, would my GP tell on him.
So how
It
did
was that illegal at the time.
so 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 how did you educate yourself?
At first, I didn't. I went around looking, and the internet was just at its infancy. There were a bit of chat forums and groups. So I came across a group of Normal back at the time, who actually diverted me and told me about this Professor Mechoulam that did some research in the Hebrew University, and it's right nearby. So I said, okay, if it's right here, I should approach him. So as a very direct guy, I just picked up the phone and called the university and asked for his number and called him. And he was kind enough to invite me over for a meeting.
How did you introduce yourself to him that made him so receptive to asking you to come over?
Well, I introduced myself as someone who just is a Crohn's patient, and doctor gave me cannabis and it helped. And I don't understand it. I want to know why, and it's illegal, and we need to change it because if it's my medicine, it should be illegal. It was that simple. And so, he was very receptive. He was very, back then. He went with open arms and took me in. And when I got to his office, he took the entire 3 hours, I think, to spend with me and explain the endocannabinoid system and what he's figured out, and it was amazing.
So I'm not sure about the answer to this. Was Professor Mechoulam responsible for discovering the endocannabinoid system?
Well, Professor Mechoulam discovered the THC back in the 60s, and in the 80s, him and Professor Lumir Hanush, alongside a few others, were a part of a team that discovered the CBD and the endocannabinoid system.
Wow. And but CBD sort of only came to the public's knowledge within the last 10 years, as far, I mean, the main public, I mean, became, I mean, I knew about it about 10 years ago. So it just took a long time for people to researchers to figure out the benefits.
It's not about, I think it's more about access than about the research having the ability to figure out, any benefits, because back at the time, let's look at the restrictions all over the world. Israel was leading with medical cannabis and cannabis research just because we allowed Professor Mechoulam, and the government allowed Professor Mechoulam and others to research cannabis, which was completely illegal and impossible anywhere else.
Right. So in that vein, what you're talking about right now, my question to you is this: I had heard that the United States has been funding Professor Mechoulam for a long time. Is there any truth to that? Do you know anything about that?
I know that the United States, just as any, just like other private companies and governments, are financing research.
Mhm.
The U.S. government is trying to prove that cannabis harms the body,
Exactly.
and that's what they did back in the beginning. And some of his research he based on funding from the U.S. government to disprove their claims.
Okay. Well, that's a
He
double.
didn't care. He didn't care who gave him money. It was like, I've got to research. You want to give me money? Bring it on.
Wants to,
But
he wants to know the truth. Now, so that being said, the United States in the mid '70s had a patent on, I believe, cannabinoids, including CBD, that said that it shrunk tumors and was good for ALS and Alzheimer's, and all these conditions were named in patent number 6630507. Are you familiar with what that patent says?
I am familiar with the patent because, everybody's talking about it and the fact that the US government is trying to preserve all the rights for this medicine. I'm not certain if it's based on Professor Mechoulam's work or others, or if it's a combination of trying to, how sometimes patent strategies say, try to prevent anybody from entering the field by saying that you own this invention.
Mhm.
And so maybe this was a scheme by the U.S. government to just try and prevent any further research into cannabis. I'm not sure.
Right. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that particular patent may have expired a couple of years ago. So that would
Yeah,
obviously help. So it's very exciting now that research can be done. So in the research that's well, let's wait for that for a second. We're going back to when you talked to Professor.
Hmm,
From what I understand, his first testing was actually done on red Lebanese hash. I believe that he went on a bus and went to a police station or something and got it and had to
exactly.
go back to it. And supposedly that was like high in CBD back then. Uh,
It was relatively high in CBD back then, yes, because we need to understand that the cannabis plants that were made, not handmade, but nature made,
Mhm.
were not as strong and as potent as they are in the past, I don't know, 20 to 30 years, because we see a lot of crossbreeding done to enhance the potency of cannabinoids in the plant. So to create the hash, they used to use about 4% THC and point something percent CBD as a basis for the sifting. So you end up with a lot higher content of CBD in the hash compared to what you have right now in the market. Because right now, when you sift through THC strains, uh, you have like over 20% THC in the strain. You have still the same content of point something CBD. So in comparison, it's relatively low.
So early on, how was Israel and Professor Mechoulam getting cannabis in order to do the research? Because here in the United States, we had a program, 40 years ago, where uh, the Ole Miss down in Mississippi was growing the crappiest weed ever, and that's what they were basing their research on. And they were shipping big tins of marijuana cigarettes to half a dozen people. There's maybe one still getting it now, Irv Rosenfeld in Florida. But it was crappy stuff. It was full of stems and seeds. And so, was the quality of Mechoulam's testing of cannabis high enough that he could really judge from? I mean, and it took him. I mean, he's been doing this for 60 something years.
Let's, yeah, well, taking it from his words, because it's not my research and I'm a secondhand speaker here. But what he's saying is that in the beginning, and we can verify it from patients and from himself as well, they were allowed to go to the police station and choose from the confiscated weed or hash or whatever was in the compound. Like, choose what you want. You have like a court order saying that you are allowed to take like 200 grams. Choose your stuff and go, something like that. So that was the beginning. Also, the first 6 patients in Israel who were licensed to use cannabis went through the courts, and this is the method of how they received their cannabis. Before there were any licenses to cultivate and whatnot, they went to the police and got from whatever the police had in hand their monthly dose of weed.
So, was the discovery of THC like the first major discovery? And I have no idea how a scientist names things and so forth. But so was that the first major discovery in cannabis, and what?
With relating to cannabis, definitely, yeah. was the major point of what molecules affect the human body or any body. Like so the discovery of the THC is like the discovery of the cannabinoids,
Right.
the early stage of the discovery.
Okay, so let's just move forward to what we've learned. Thank you, Professor Mechoulam and his team and everybody. Because you were
Yeah.
the world practically doing that at that time, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude. I hope Professor Mechoulam's health is good and great, and he lives a long time. Maybe he should try cannabis.
Well,
That sort of helps people in their bodies. I wonder if Professor Mechoulam's endocannabinoid system has ever been activated, but as we know, he's claimed that he's never tried it at all.
from the last time I've heard, he still claims that he's never tried it at all.
Wink.
I don't know. However, the during that session, the first session, I had some really strong question to ask him from my parents because they were very, very considered and they thought that secondhand smoke is dangerous.
Mhm.
So I had to ask the question. And his response was amazing. I mean, we're sitting in a room like 2 meters by 3 meters. That's his office, or 2.5 by 3 meters, whatever that is in feet. You can make the calculations for the audience. And like a small office, and we're sitting across from one another, and there's a small window, and he's saying, like, secondhand smoke is like being in a room about the same size as this, my wife's kitchen, when she's baking a cake. I'm looking at him all puzzled. He goes like, if you ever had a piece of cake my wife baked, your mouth would already drizzle. You'd even feel the taste at the end of your tongue. At 0 calories.
That's wonderful. Wow. I've always wanted to meet him, and I probably won't get a chance, but I just admired him. I've listened to him talk. I've seen the documentary, and anyway, the whole world owes Professor absolutely. So,
Yeah, he's
tell me about
amazing.
your quest to not only educate medical professionals.
Well, my quest was to educate myself and then others. So at first it was 1999, and in 2000 I met with Professor Mechoulam just as I left the army with honors. And then I joined the Greenleaf Party in Israel, who were the only ones carrying the green leaf and running for parliament. Even though they didn't make it in, I took charge of the medical cannabis part of the party and promoted that and applied for medical cannabis license with the Ministry of Health. I was the first that I know of to have applied without the court, directly as a request within the guidelines of the law. And after 4 years, I received this scarlet letter saying, you've got a license to cultivate, use, and carry cannabis. And I'm like, wow.
Did the hair stand
awesome.
up? I mean, because I got my first license, not to do research or anything, but to be a legal cannabis user as a medical patient. I had already used the plant for 45 years and, used to sneak around and buy it and use it. And when I got that card in the mail, I mean, the hair on the back of my neck and my arms, I just got this chill through my whole body. It was an amazing feeling. I'm sure you probably felt similar.
I felt the same, and I went up to my grow house that was a stash grow house and took the plants out and told my mom, "Here, Mom, we got the license. We can grow now." And they're like, in mid bloom, and she goes like, "How did they get from seed to this big today?" I don't know.
It was a wonderful thing, and they gave us this plant, absolutely. So
Yeah.
you educated yourself, and then wanted to educate everybody.
Yeah, it was a process because in the beginning I just thought that it couldn't be that this medicine helps me and it can't help others. So I tried to educate doctors so they could help patients be licensed. And with the support of the Ministry of Health, I went and approached doctors with patients that were eligible and tried to educate them about the ability to license them cannabis, to prescribe, or to actually, back at the time, it was request a license from the Ministry of Health, and then the ministry needs to issue the license because there's a manager for the cannabis and drugs and whatnot in the Ministry of Health. We basically found the loophole that the guy that was licensing drug companies for dealing with drugs, and every year they need to renew their license to have drugs in their possession and whatnot. So there was a guy in the Ministry of Health with this position. Put it on him. So all the patients applied to him, and he found himself flooded with applications, and it's all within the boundaries of the law. But he was the guy that basically signed the licenses. So when we reached 500 licenses after 2 years, and then 1,000 licenses in the third year, and 5 the fourth year, the guy collapsed, and they established the administration.
So what year are we talking about that you got your license? Let's say to start.
I got my license in 2004.
Okay. And
Um,
and that
and in
progressed.
in 2009 we had about 5,000 patients.
And it's many years later. How many do you have now?
Ooh, I think last week we just crossed 100,000 patients and 1% of the Israeli population that's holding an active cannabis license.
We have about 100,000 here in New Mexico. We only have a 2 million population here. What's the population of Israel?
Wow, population in Israel is almost 10 million. So
Okay. Wow, you're growing fast, and it's going to start doubling for sure. So,
yeah, now
about the medical cannabis program in Israel, so you have 100,000 patients. So, can you describe it to us? What are they allowed to get? And I believe you said they go to pharmacies for it. Is that correct?
yeah, but I'm going to go back to it. I'll start here and move back. But right now the situation is a bit different than it was because the new reform both raised the price but regulated the entire market. So right now, patients get it from pharmacies. They get prescriptions versus just licenses. So they get both a license for cannabis for the entire year and monthly prescriptions they can use in any pharmacy anywhere in Israel. They opened up the market for competition. So there are a lot of pharmacies, a lot of growers, a lot of different applicants for different types of licenses. I think they freed up a bit too many licenses because we were restricted back at the time to 8 major suppliers up to the new reform. And then they changed it and opened up the market to over 150 growers.
And these are licensed by the country of Israel, the state of Israel,
Yeah.
you say it. And so, what about patients? Can they grow their own medicine?
No, patients cannot grow their own. They cannot hold more than the licensed amount that they have in the prescription. So if you, by chance, have leftovers from last month, and you took your entire monthly prescription of this month, and a cop catches you with the entire monthly prescription plus the leftovers of last month, you can get arrested.
What is the weight involved in being arrested? Is there a certain
Uh,
weight of the cannabis? You know how much?
doesn't matter as long as it's over your legal dose. You can get arrested for dealing drugs because how would you get that? It's the assumption is always that you're guilty before you're proven innocent.
Wow.
So it is a problem. However, there was also a reform with the first time users that are caught by the police. They can be fined if they choose to, instead of going directly to be arrested. So
So,
you get like a several $100 fine for the first time you're caught, but then you're in the system.
can you tell me what different forms of cannabis is available as medicine there?
Right now, it's mainly flour, and it's not even concentrate. It's oil concentrate dissolved in oils for sublingual consumption.
So when you say concentrate, are we talking about using keef? Or are they extracting it with alcohol? Is there a method of the concentrate?
And they don't have a method specifically. There are different methods to different suppliers. They do have the regulatory framework restricts the end product to fit within specific regulations and specific, for example, it must be within a range of CBD to THC that fits the regulations. Otherwise, it can't fit the market. So if you bring a 20 THC to 6 CBD, for example, ratio, it doesn't exist in the system. You can't bring the product in.
So you're talking that would be like a little over 3.5 to 1 ratio between CBD and THC. Is that what you said? 20.
It
So maybe it's I can't do the math in my head, but so
yeah, exactly.
does every patient have a different allotment every month? Because
Yes, it's a different prescription. But in the past, if we're going back to the past and going on to where we are today, because it will help understand the framework and where we are today. We had the monthly prescription prescribed to the patient by the doctors, licensed by the government, and then it was provided by the growers for free in the beginning. I was one of the growers that grew it and gave it away for free. And then a few of the people around me wanted to expand the cultivation. And I wanted to focus on the education. And 8 farms expanded to become huge. And they gave it basically the supplies for free for 4 years before they started charging. At that point, they started charging $100 a month, roughly, was 370 shekels per month, regardless of the dose. It
oh,
was per prescription. The reason for it was that cannabis is illegal. It is prescribed to you, but it's illegal, so I cannot sell it. What I can sell is the service of providing you with your monthly dose of medicine.
okay. Where did
Therefore, it's a fixed price.
okay. Where did the genetics come from that the your medical program in Israel is using? And
Some from Europe.
how consistent is this medicine when it gets to your patients every month? How consistent is it every month for them?
Back in the beginning, it was much more consistent than now, unfortunately, because of 2 reasons. And exactly, you would be surprised. Because there were only 8 growers and they were actually not a monopoly. They were fighting for market share because the government basically set the rules of saying this is the only amount you can charge a patient. They were all wanting to expand the patient base to generate more revenues because you get $100 a month per patient, regardless of the dose you give it. You get to cultivate cannabis, but you still need to generate money to do this, even if you are doing it as something that you want to contribute to the world and maybe in the future generate money from, you don't want to bleed money every month.
So what you're saying is that now, because there's more growers, and they use different techniques probably, and they're probably using different cultivars, that you have more of a variance in what people are. I mean, obviously it's tested, so I mean, I'm going to also guess that different diseases or afflictions are allotted more higher THC than lower or higher CBD. Is that being done when you're writing a prescription for a patient? Are they considering which uh, uh, disease they have and how to titrate them?
I don't know how they do it. I know they do. I mean, I've read the book. I don't understand any of the reasonings behind how the doctors are being told right now under the new regulations to prescribe a ratio of THC to CBD to a patient. And most of them don't either. So they actually try one thing, and if they're told by the patient change it to a different prescription, they just do.
So,
But once they prescribe the medicine, the problem is much deeper. Once the patient arrives to the pharmacy, they have no ability to know what's in the inventory. And because we have such a wide variety and zero control over inventory, a lot of the times patients need to change and replace their medicine month after month after month. So it's got, and that's regardless of the internal stability or instability between batches. So even if I try to find a strain or a cultivar that works for me, this specific batch works for me.
mhm.
Maybe the next one will be lower on THC by far. Like, for example, the differences can be 24% THC in one cultivar and 19.8 in the next. It's the same cultivar. They just didn't breed it under the same conditions or whatnot, and it ended up with lower THC content. Now, it does contain the same terpene ratios or whatnot, so it will be good for me. But because my monthly dose, my monthly prescription is restricted to an X amount of grams, if I buy this now, I will need more of it to get to the same amount of cannabinoids in my body. So I will end up with having 2 days at the end of the month without weed instead of having a full amount for the entire month.
Okay, so this may be a good point for you and I to discuss the article that I sent you today, where a patient in Israel decided that he, didn't want to smoke because it was against his religious beliefs on Fridays.
Yes.
And he kept coming into the hospital on Saturdays with having a seizure. So, I think we both know what that probably was about. So, I know you just read this, but what is your opinion of what's going on?
Well, I've read this and then I looked into some other articles about it just to understand a bit more about what was reported both in the Israeli media and in the global media. And what I figured out from it is that the patient was enduring back pain for a while, and nobody said what other symptoms he had. Okay. And at some point, he started consuming cannabis, which reduced the back pain and all the rest of the symptoms. And when he stopped using it for Saturdays, some seizures appeared. Now, a lot of patients that are deteriorating on the beginning of an autoimmune system or an autoimmune disease will suffer from back pain or other pains on top of the of other symptoms related to the actual source. And a lot of times, the source may be a disease that is related to seizures. And because he's already been treated from the beginning of the symptoms appearing with cannabis for the pain, it was also reducing the other symptoms.
Right. So
And so,
he may well have had. Sorry to interrupt. He may well have had a undiagnosed seizure condition, but because he was using cannabis for another condition, it was staving off his seizures, as we know cannabis can do. And so when he stopped and lowered that amount of cannabis in his body, maybe that's what's causing his seizures because he wasn't using enough to be non-seizure, right?
that's one of the theories that also is being tested by his physicians at the hospital. It's not one that's been very widely published in the common media, but it has been published in some articles. So I know that it's not me who's saying it. It's my opinion, but apparently some other doctors think the same way, that it isn't a possibility.
It's interesting because
Um,
I lived with a woman for 25 years, and she never had a seizure condition, and she used to, imbibe in cannabis with me in Los Angeles back in the day, and then she had a thyroid problem and had to have her thyroid taken out, and then she didn't want to smoke again, and her seizure condition became very uh, prominent and had to go on those terrible seizure medications that cannabis has just been eliminating, Depakote and Neurontin and all that horrible, horrible medicine that just takes away people's lives just because of what it does to the body. And of course, I'm not with her anymore, and I don't know if she ever went back to using cannabis or not. But I had that thought when I read that article and sent it to you this morning that this could have been, something that she maybe could have developed from the thyroid cancer, but that she may have already had a seizure condition but was undiagnosed. So that's very interesting. So, how are you doing in your education now? Is it easier to educate people because you're smarter about the plant? Are people more like doctors and patients and nurses? Are they more open now that the world has now been proven that this is a medicine and it's a real medicine?
Well, I can tell you that the proof is in the pudding and it's different for every single one. So for the patients, it's very easy for me to prove because there are so many patients and I have so much experience, so many stories to tell the patients so they can relate to on a firsthand experience. So they feel a part of the story already and it's easier to relate and then they believe it can fit them. However, when I educate patients, I try to start off with lowering the wow factor and all of the miracle factor of cannabis because a lot of patients come to cannabis after sort of as a last resort. Okay. And when they come to it as a last resort, they expect miracles. Now, if you expect to stop having any pain when you're a stage 4 cancer patient, mm, tough. It's not in the books. Okay, we can decrease it to a tolerable level. You will feel a lot better, but the chances of feeling zero pain,
Well,
I wouldn't aim this high. So I'm decreasing. First of all, I'm lowering the expectations to something that's much more feasible, so that any patient could get the benefit of small miracles like a good night's sleep. For a patient that is in pain and hasn't had a good night's sleep in a month is life changing. Or a good meal that you can digest instead of vomit afterwards is amazing. For both cancer patients with nausea and for Crohn's and the IBD patients and whatnot. So for any patient, there's this small step, the first step that they need to look for, and then look for the second step and the third step. Don't go for the whole building all at once.
well, we're still learning about this every day with the work that you're doing. The people in Israel are doing, and you're seeing real life reaction from patients and so forth. So, do let's talk about tolerance for a second. Let's say a particular patient
Mm.
for multiple sclerosis, has been using the same dosage of cannabis to help them. And of course, we're still talking about flower only, right? There's no
Yeah,
there's no
mostly flour.
there's no suppositories to get the colon cancer. There's nothing.
Nope.
There's no strong oil like Rick Simpson made famous. The to
Out of the this is out of the regulatory framework. They pushed it out.
So have you guys been pushing the government there to allow for these extracts that say, and people have gone into remission in stage 4 cancers? I mean, why in 2021 is the government still using just 20 or 19% or 10% cannabis bud? And now that I believe you have a new government coming in, and maybe in this next segment here that we're talking, you can tell us what their position might be and will it change?
Yeah, well, I hope it will change. Right now, we see that in the coalition agreements, they are discussing at least decriminalization, if not legalization, of cannabis. So it is already in the discussions of the setting up of this government. So within the next 4 years, I believe we will see legalization in Israel. That being said, on the medical front, there is a lot more force of power, so to speak, when you follow the money. There are the pharma companies pushing, there are the regulators pushing in, and when they did the reform, they put it in a way that you have to go through five links in the chain of supply to reach a patient from the farm. So you got the farm,
Okay, so the farm.
then you got the processing plant, packaging plant, the distributor, and the pharmacy.
And then the sixth person is the patient. So there's
Exactly.
it's been handled 5 times and processed and whatever 5 times. Okay.
So there are 5 links in the chain that need to make a buck on the patient's back.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, it was direct, farm to consumer. Within this frame, there are difficulties, and within that framework, there are difficulties. But I believe right now the patients are suffering much more because the restrictions are also restricting a lot of different products from being in the market, even though they have been proven very, very positive. Probably because of financial reasons. I mean, usually what I say is follow the money. And for that reason, also, I follow the money when I do instructions and when I teach patients and educate patients. We see that the dropout rates are decreasing by far. Without proper education, real patients, and I'm talking about patients that have never tried cannabis before and have been diverted or prescribed cannabis by their physician and trying it for the first time. Without the proper education, about 40% of patients don't take their second dose from the pharmacy.
Well, what were they told about the first dose? Were they not given great instructions? I mean,
That's what I'm saying. Without instructions, what basically, if the doctor prescribes it to you and you go to the pharmacist and you don't tell him I want help, you just tell him, okay, give this to me, and he tells you, okay, here's the menu, choose.
no.
I don't know what I'll take. This looks yummy. I heard people talk about Black Domino, so I'll take this. And gelato looks like a nice name. I'll take this.
No, that's
Okay. Now what is it?
yeah.
How do I use it?
I actually
How much? I don't know.
I actually managed a dispensary for 2 years and counseled many first-time patients. Okay, because I'd already been using the plant for 40-something years already. So I had some knowledge and have used a lot of cannabis. So I mean, I always tell the patients that came into the dispensary, every time you buy a new cultivar, you need to just take 1 or 2 puffs, put it down, and wait 15, 20 minutes and see how you feel. So that's why, people that weren't given those kind of instructions and then smoked more,
I,
probably the reason why they never took the second dose, because their
I
endocannabinoid activated and they just got too psychoactive. And I'm sure it was
Yeah, I completely agree. Listen, we've had patients that try to hold joint for the first time ever, and we're talking about a full gram joint of 24% THC, 0% CBD, 0.1% CBN, and obviously never tried again. And we have patients that went through the proper instruction and continued on. However, the proper instruction is not a very short process. It's a lengthy process. It's a 3-month process of follow-up with the patient and the pharmacist and the doctor or nurse following his case. And we actually had to set up scales of you know, for example, a scale of nausea versus appetite, a scale of pain versus pain relief, muscle stiffness versus muscle relaxant, and so on. So different scales of reporting, so that the patients can report in a way that we can analyze it later and help them, because they don't know, they don't understand it, and they're too afraid to ask.
So journaling is definitely something that should be done by patients. I believe in that. It helps other people as well. I've always wanted to ask someone like yourself this question, and it just never came to me at the right time. So, what is it when you're smoking cannabis, a joint or whatever, a pipe, a bong, that gives you that rush, that sort of, for a couple of seconds, kind of disorients you? What is it?
Well,
THC. I find in high THC that seems to happen.
I'll be honest with you. As a very high dose patient that consumes on a very steady regime, I don't feel the high. If I want to feel the high, I will have to consume high THC concentrates, such as dabbing, for example. That will blow my mind for a party. But on a day-to-day basis, when I'm just consuming for my medical purposes, it's usually around every 3 hours. And because I'm a quarter a day user, and yeah, that's a quarter ounce a day, um, it's a lot, but my system's always saturated in a way that I don't feel the differences. I don't get it to be unsaturated enough to feel the high when I reduce, so to speak.
Mhm.
Because my endocannabinoid system is in such imbalance, I need to flood it to be balanced and keep the Crohn safe. I unfortunately had to go through 8.5 years of chemotherapy and 4 years of biological treatment to get away from Crohn's alongside cannabis, and this saved my life completely. And now that I'm probably 10, almost 11 years chemo and biological medicines free, I want to keep it this way.
Mhm. Is chemo a very popular treatment for Crohn's? I've never known that before.
No, it's a very extreme. However, I was one of the extreme cases of Crohn's, and I refused to go through surgery. They wanted to take away my entire intestine and leave me with a bag for life. And I said that a bag for life is something for London and their recycling thing, not for me and my my life.
So, how do you maintain? What's your maintenance for Crohn's as far as dosing? I have a very close friend that has been in the rooms, with you and me on Clubhouse, who has.
I start my day with a gram of high THC, what they call sativa. Okay, I'll use the most common terms, even though there is no such thing as sativa, indica, or hybrid. They're all hybrids, and it's basically based on a terpene profile and a cannabinoid profile. So, but I find the strains that are more energizing, the cultivars that are more energizing with high THC for the mornings. And I consume about half a gram of this plus half a gram of about 20% THC to 4% CBD.
four
Of also,
percent CBD.
yeah, yeah, just to wake up in the morning, and that's my wake up call with my coffee, because without this, my body doesn't start pumping. I mean, my stomach is so intensely cramped that I just can't walk.
Mhm.
It's that simple. And then it's the waste removal time and starting the day, and then 2 hours later I consume what you would call a sativa, another half a gram. Then before lunch probably a strong sativa, and after lunch probably a strong indica, again to relax the muscles while digesting.
So, I know we have a little background noise there, but your dogs sound
Yeah,
happy.
I'm sorry, there's a dog
That,
barking, one of the neighbors' dogs.
that's okay. So,
That's it, it's done.
so let me ask you this: knowing about this extreme condition, which is devastating for so many people, Crohn's. Um, I had a young lady on my show 8 or 9 years ago with Crohn's who wrote a book, and trying to think, Shona Banda, I think was her name, and she was eating oil that she would vaporize, in a vaporizer. She noticed that the oil would get stuck to the top of the glass. This is a vaporizer from many years ago, and she would take oil.
Yeah.
She's written a book about it. But if you were not in Israel, because Israel only allows you to use bud, how would you treat yourself if you were in the United States and you had access to all that strong oil and so forth? Do you think you'd be doing better, or what would you change up? Any ideas? Because
I'll definitely, yeah.
States that are trying to feel better with Crohn. So I just was wondering what you could recommend.
Well, for me personally, I know that bud works, especially in the morning at nighttime just before going to sleep. So I would keep that as the main basis for waking up and going to sleep. But for the day, for the ongoing of the day, I would probably use concentrates in microdosing
Throughout.
because throughout the day, because of, listen, cannabis consumption is extremely time consuming. It takes about 4 hours of my day to consume my quarter a day. That's 4 more hours or 3.5 more hours I could work out of those 4 hours if I could microdose throughout my day with extracts versus taking a bud, grinding it, preparing it, getting ready, then smoking it, which takes time, you know? We do enjoy this relaxation and whatnot, but when you're looking at the scale of life, and if you're trying to accomplish something and you have a goal and you're running for something, or you have kids and you just want to spend more time with them, or whatever the case be, cannabis consumption is time consuming as well.
Have you been to the United States in the last few years? I know that you have dual citizenship. You were actually born here. Do you
Yeah, I
visit? I know because of the pandemic in the last year, traveling has probably not been something that people.
no, I haven't in the past year, but until 2 years ago, I've been in the MJ BizCon throughout the past, I think, three of them, and I hope to be in the next one as well. Don't hold me to it, but I'm already scheduling to be.
I'm going to hold you to that because I'm going to go to that one too. I live, maybe a 8 hour drive from Las Vegas if that's where they're going to hold it. But we have so much more to talk about. So, what I'd like to do, I'd like to just, maybe wrap up with a couple of things for about 5 minutes here, and then I'd like to then do another show with you in a couple of weeks where we can get into terpenes and your experience with that, and how important they're going to be in the future. So not to wrap up education because I'm sure we can talk more about that, but I have about 5 more minutes if you want to touch on something, and then we'll do it.
Definitely. So I will touch on something because I was starting to just before, as I said, that we have about 40% dropout rate in the first month with uneducated patients, whereas when we have very good educated patients, and when I'm talking about very good, I'm talking about the 3 month process plus a hotline that they can call whenever they need to change a strain or ask a question or whatnot, then we have about 3 years of client life cycle in the pharmacy, in the same pharmacies that gave him the education, or within the company that gave him the education if it was in the past. I also have data from companies that I consulted in the US that show the same client life cycle, which is amazing, and about 95, between 90 and 95% of the questions or the answers that are being given by the patients. I'm talking about medical pharmacies, not the recreational dispensaries. So medical dispensaries, about 95% loyalty rates to the strains that the patients are using. They don't want to switch strains. They want to keep to the same thing that helps them. And that's what we see in the data. And once I presented this to companies, they become a lot more open and receptive to the patient education and to spend money on it. And, because they thought it was just an expense in the beginning.
What did you mean by recreational dispensary? I'm not sure what you meant by that.
Well, right now in the States, you have recreational and medical. You have adult use and
Oh, I thought you were talking Israel. Okay, I was
No, but because I consult globally and not just locally, I do consult also. I have in the past consulted recreational
pharmacy.
dispensaries,
Did you
and
maybe the pharmacy, and that's what confused me. So, uh,
yeah, yeah.
Gil, we have a lot more to talk about. So, how can people? We're going to do another show in a couple of weeks, and we'll touch on some more stuff. Maybe we'll just do one a month or something until I've sucked all the education out of the brain. And
I'd love to share.
I know you do. You're up on a Clubhouse at all different hours, and you've just been an amazing addition to educating people all over the world because of your knowledge. So, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, the best way to get hold of me is either by mail. That's gil@luxembourg.co.il. If you could put it up somehow, it
I will.
would be amazing.
I will post that.
Or through my Instagram, either on my business Instagram, which is Cannaboost Papers, or on my personal Instagram, which is Luxyging, Luxyging.
Okay, fantastic. We'll have you back in a couple of weeks. I appreciate your expertise and your passion for sharing with the public and with patients to make them feel better. So, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Larry.
Appreciate your time this evening. We'll be
I'll see you soon, and
absolutely. We'll be right back after this. I look forward.
thanks for having me.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. All love.
I want to thank Gil very much for his knowledge, expertise, and his time. Also want to thank my two radio mentors, both with the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. Don't forget my Late Night with Larawana show on Clubhouse every Friday and Saturday nights at 9 p.m. California or West Coast time. And we'll be back again next week with another great guest. Peace and love, everybody. Peace and love.